Every week in synagogues around the globe, we study the words of Torah, we chant the words in the Torah portion. There are individual verses that are so well known, they're actually common parlance, like, love your neighbor as yourself. I am God. We often leave out those words, but nevertheless. And then there's another phrase that's well known to every parent and every child who has heard, honor your father and your mother. That comes up at certain times. And in addition to specific verses that are well known, often when you analyze the Torah or the Bible, it yields an insight. For example, what is the phrase that God utters more often than any other phrase in the Bible? I confess I simply would not have known the answer to that, but I happened to be reading one of Rabbi Harold Kushner's High Holiday sermons, and he points out that the most commonly repeated phrase in the Bible is Al Tira, do not fear. God says these words to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to every generation, as it were, in the Bible. Al Tira, do not fear. Those are words that are meant to liberate. Apparently, God says them something like 80 times. Here's another tidbit. What mitzvah is repeated in the Torah more than any other? I know it's a question that's been plaguing many of you this morning, since you got up this morning. But you know what? It's really worthy of note. The Talmud actually points it out that the law repeated, that the mitzvah repeated more than any other is the law against wronging the stranger. Because we, you Israelites, were once strangers in the land of Egypt. That actually appears in the Torah 36 times. On another occasion, I'll share with you personal and other analyses of the explanation as to why that is the most often repeated mitzvah. And then there's a teaching that I'm a bit embarrassed to acknowledge I didn't really notice. But the more I reflected on it, it seems not only to be at the core of Judaism, but at the core of one of the ideals that we've been discussing here at our temple of note. And it's the pasuk, it's the verse that I want to focus on tonight. Mishpat echad yihyeh lachem keger ke'ezra yihyeh. Ki ani Adonai Elohechem. You shall have one standard or one law for the stranger and the citizen alike. For I, the Lord, or I, Adonai, am your God. One standard for stranger and citizen alike, because I, Adonai, am your God. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it's one of the great teachings of the Torah. One law for the native born and the same law for the stranger. There was no parallel in history at that time, and it's true in much of the world today. Historically, in Roman law, everyone who was seen as a stranger was actually classified by the Romans as an enemy. And enemies generally have, as you know, no rights. And slowly, such a person was given some protection, but still, it was very limited. And there were feudal systems. You may remember this from your studies of history going back to elementary school or high school. Feudal systems in Persia, in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in the Islamic-ruled northern and central India, and in Japan, and in China. Serfs, of course, have basically no legal rights. And there are many countries in the world in which the civil and political rights of strangers are simply non-existent, or at least severely limited. Judaism understood that this one standard referred to moral conduct and to legal conduct. And it also referred to civil legislation in ancient Israel. The consequence of that is that Jewish law does not recognize any distinction in civil rights between native and stranger. We call that at our temple, in some ways, inclusivity. Judaism has been talking about this for thousands of years. I share this with you because it's such a striking example of what we've been talking about at the temple. The idea that all human beings are to be respected and treated properly. It's a statement that the color of your skin, your ethnic background, your history was and is not pertinent when it comes to how laws should be made or how people should be treated. It means that businesses don't have one law for some and another for others. You deal with everybody in the same way. And Judaism doesn't just state this as an ideal, it legislates it. That's what Judaism always does. It states an ideal and then legislates a way to make sure that it happens. And those laws reflect the ideals of a society. And now I want to point out something else that I think, frankly, is rarely recognized and very important. There's a flip side to this. Because equality in law also means there's equal expectations. If there is one standard of law for everyone, then there needs to be one standard of behavior that all are expected to live by. Everyone should strive to live up to the same social mores and the same moral ideals, native and stranger, irrespective of color of skin, of ethnic background, of history. That when you're welcomed into a land, welcomed into a country, you have the equal rights and equal protection under the law, but you also have equal obligation, an obligation to better yourself, to better your society, to make contributions, not to always see yourself as a victim or feel that society owes you. The minute you feel that, you don't want to build a society. We are all in this together. It's a two-way street. One standard of laws, which is what I think Judaism recognized for native and stranger, and therefore respecting the human being and understanding them, giving them full rights, as well as one standard of obligations. And finally, let's look at how the law concludes. I'll read it again. Mishpat echad yihye lachem keger, ke'ezra yihye, ki Adonai, ki ani Adonai Elohechem. You shall have one standard or one law for the stranger and citizen alike, and this is how it includes 3 words in Hebrew. Ani Adonai Elohechem, for I am the Lord your God. Ki Ani Adonai Elohechem, for I, Adonai, am your God. The reason for this moral law, the reason for this standard, the reason a Jew is supposed to show justice to all people is because I, Adonai, your God, expect it of you. The God of Israel, the God of all humanity, it is God who demands this. It is God and monotheism that's the basis for it. I cannot overstate this, that without God and the teachings of the Torah, we lose these ideals. It's the secular world that is making war on these ideals. If we choose to diminish the role of Torah, if we diminish the role of God in our lives, in our society, or in our children, we will lose, I fear, the greatest source of wisdom and values in the world. That's my fear of what's happening in our secular world, where God and the Bible are less and less the guiding principles of life, and how I feel becomes the guiding principle of life. And that is something I'm very concerned about. The values which I hold, and I think our tradition holds, very dear. We will lose this ideal, this standard of one law for all, native and stranger, unless everyone feels obligated to live by these ideals, and lest we forget where they came from. And that's why every week in our temples, in our synagogues, around the globe, we should strive to study and hear those words of Torah. words that remind us of the both lofty yet reachable values to which we and our world can aspire. Shabbat Shalom.